The sun blazed down on a quiet city street as Marcus adjusted the gold watch on his wrist, a gift from his late father, a reminder of hard work and perseverance. He had no idea today would be the day everything changed. Just as he stepped out of a cafe, a police siren wailed, and within seconds, an officer blocked his path. "Where'd you get that watch?" the cop demanded, eyes filled with suspicion. Marcus barely had time to respond before the officer yanked it from his wrist. "Looks stolen to me," he muttered, ignoring Marcus's protests. Frustration turned to anger, but before Marcus could speak, another car pulled up. The door swung open, and out stepped a sharply dressed man, his son a judge. His eyes locked onto the officer, his face unreadable. Silence hung in the air. One wrong move, and this situation could take a turn no one expected. The officer's grip tightened around the watch as he eyed the man who had just arrived. His uniform still gave him confidence, but something about the newcomer's presence made him hesitate. Marcus, rubbing his wrist where the watch had been snatched, finally found his voice. "This is my son, Judge Anthony Carter," Marcus said, his tone steady but edged with frustration. The officer blinked, clearly thrown off. He glanced at Anthony, who stood tall, his expression unreadable. "Judge, huh?" the officer muttered, shifting uncomfortably. Anthony took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving the officer. "Is there a reason my father is being stopped? Or why you have something that belongs to him?" His voice was calm but firm, demanding an explanation without raising it. The officer's confidence wavered. He knew he had a problem now. But instead of backing down, he clenched his jaw. "Just doing my job." Anthony narrowed his eyes. "Is that right?" The street felt quieter now, as if the weight of the moment had pushed all sound away. Marcus kept his eyes on his son, feeling a mix of relief and unease. He had seen situations like this before, where power and prejudice collided, but this time it was personal. The officer shifted his stance, still gripping the watch. "Like I said, it looks stolen. Got a lot of these going around. Just being cautious." His words came slower now, less sure of themselves. Anthony folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "And what exactly made you assume my father's watch was stolen?" The officer hesitated, searching for a response that wouldn't make things worse. "Standard procedure," he finally said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Marcus exhaled sharply. "I've had this watch for years. It belonged to my father before me. And now you're standing here holding it like you have a right to." A brief silence hung between them before Anthony spoke again. "Return the watch." His voice was calm, but left no room for argument. The officer glanced around, as if looking for backup. But none was coming. He was alone in this now. His fingers twitched around the watch, his next move uncertain. The officer's grip on the watch tightened, his jaw clenching. He glanced at Anthony, then at Marcus, then back at the watch in his hand. The tension was thick, the moment stretching longer than it should. Marcus could feel his heart pounding, his patience running thin. "You heard him. Give it back." His voice was firm now, steady, refusing to let this slide. The officer exhaled sharply, his face unreadable. "I still need to verify." Anthony took another step closer, his presence commanding. "Verify what?" "That a man can own something valuable without suspicion." His voice was measured, but there was an edge to it. "Or are you just stalling because you realize you've made a mistake?" The officer's face twitched, his authority slipping through his fingers just like the watch he still held. A few bystanders had gathered at a distance, watching the standoff unfold. The weight of eyes on him made his discomfort grow. Then a voice crackled through his radio. A call from dispatch. The officer hesitated, glancing at it, his mind racing. He had a choice to make, one that could shift everything in an instant. But the moment was slipping away, and soon he would have no control left at all. The officer's radio crackled again, but he didn't reach for it. His fingers flexed around the watch, his mind torn between pride and pressure. He had been in control a moment ago, but now, with a judge standing in front of him and a growing audience watching, his authority felt like it was slipping away. Then a voice cut through the silence. "Officer Daniels." A second officer approached quickly, his face tense. Marcus and Anthony both turned, sensing the shift. The newcomer looked at the watch in Daniel's hand, then at Anthony. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Judge Carter," he said, his tone careful. "There's been a mistake." Anthony didn't blink. "I know." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" he muttered, his grip still firm. The second officer hesitated. "We just got a report. A stolen watch was recovered across town." "Not this one." His voice was lower now, almost warning. "We need to de-escalate." Daniel's face darkened. He had pushed too far, and now the ground beneath him was shifting. But he wasn't ready to let go, not yet. Marcus crossed his arms, watching the officer closely. "You hear that?" he said, his voice calm but sharp. "So what happens now?" For the first time, Daniels looked unsure. His fingers twitched around the watch, as if debating whether to let go or dig in deeper. The moment hung on a thread, ready to snap at any second. Daniel's fingers tightened one last time around the watch before his shoulders tensed. He could feel the weight of the moment, the silent demand for him to make a choice. His eyes flickered between Anthony and the second officer, his face a storm of pride and hesitation. Then with a slow exhale, he released the watch, letting it drop into Marcus's open palm. Marcus clenched his fingers around it, a mix of relief and frustration washing over him. "Was that so hard?" he muttered, his voice low but sharp. Daniels took a step back, his jaw tight. "Just doing my job," he muttered, but the words felt hollow now. Anthony stared at him for a long moment. "A job done wrong can cost more than just a watch," he said evenly. "Think about that." Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but the second officer cleared his throat. "We should go," he said quickly, sensing the moment slipping beyond control. As Daniels turned, his radio crackled again. He finally reached for it, muttering a curt reply before walking away. The second officer gave Marcus and Anthony an apologetic nod before following. Just as the tension seemed to ease, a voice spoke from the crowd. "You think that's the end of it?" Marcus turned, his eyes landing on an older man leaning against a lamppost. His face was lined with experience, his expression unreadable. "This ain't over," the man continued, his voice calm but knowing. "Not for him." Marcus felt a chill run through him. Daniels had backed down today, but something about the way he walked away, stiff, silent, burning inside, felt like a warning. Anthony exhaled, shaking his head. "We'll be ready," he said, but even he knew that some battles didn't end in a single moment. Some had a way of finding their way back. Marcus looked down at the watch in his hand, running his fingers over its familiar weight. It wasn't just metal and glass, it was history, a reminder of everything his family had built despite the odds. He slipped it back onto his wrist, tightening the strap as if grounding himself in the moment. Anthony placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "You okay?" Marcus nodded, but his eyes lingered on the street where Daniels had walked away. "I've been through worse," he said, his voice steady. "But it never gets easier." Anthony exhaled, glancing at the bystanders slowly dispersing. Today, the truth won. That's what matters. The older man from the crowd gave Marcus a final knowing look before turning and walking away. The message was clear: there would always be another battle. But for now, Marcus stood tall, his watch back where it belonged, and the sun setting on another hard-earned victory.